Hello and welcome to Newsmakers. I'm your host, Lisa Pugh. It's a name on the ballot that doesn't typically get a lot of attention, but races for Secretary of State are heating up nationally and in Wisconsin. It's due in part to a movement in the Republican Party for the position to take more control over elections administration in states. In Wisconsin, Republican Representative Amy Loudenbeck, who has been in the state assembly since 2010, is the leading challenger to the incumbent Secretary of State Doug Follette, who has held the job for 4 decades. Representative Loundenbeck joins us today. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So why do you want to be Secretary of State?
I really feel like I can add value to the office, even at a minimum, doing the duties that are there and doing them well. It's disturbing that that office is really an empty locked door in the basement with nothing to show for it except for Doug Follette's name on the door. And it could be more, even providing more modern services, doing more as a board member for the BCPL. It's a $1 billion board. It's a lot of responsibility in that office, even as small as it may seem to the average voter. But the idea of adding elections or adding other responsibilities back to that office, nothing's going to change until we change the person in that office. So I feel like putting myself out there as a value-added candidate, as someone who has a good working relationship with the legislature, really could change that office for the better.
Sure. You know, as kind of a testament to the interest in the office nationally, fundraising for these sorts of races is 2.5 times greater than it was over the last 2 election cycles. I know in your January financing report, you said you have $145,000 cash on hand. Compare that to the 2018 race when the incumbent had just $5,000. So quite a bit of difference in money. How do you explain this really renewed interest in the office of Secretary of State?
Well, we'll look at the balance of Doug Follette. I mean, he's basically been running on his name ID for as long as I can look back into his finance reports. I mean, he did run against in the gubernatorial recall. He was in that primary, so he had lent himself some money and run for that. But otherwise, he hasn't raised or spent money. He's just maintained this office. And so anyone that's going to take him on, I think the proposition that I make to people is I have to get my name ID out there statewide and my message. And so in order to do all these exciting things and talk about my ideas, we have to first make sure that we're communicating to the rest of the state, because it's not just going to be a red wave or, of course, I'm going to win. This is a long shot. And so I think the people that have invested me in the past in my assembly race, most of the money I've raised is actually from my assembly district right now, or from my usual donors. We haven't really done a statewide push. And so I think there's a lot of room to grow.
So that 2.5 times difference in funding applies nationally. So I think you're saying that Secretary Follette has been able to run in his name and maybe didn't need that amount of money. Mm-hmm. How do you explain the discrepancy in the major investment nationally in Secretary of State races?
Well, it's something that I'm sure is going to be the topic of conversation. I mean, I really try to focus on my own race, and I do know that I'm breaking kind of historic norms with the fundraising and with just the sheer dedication to and the resolve to run and win is a little bit different. But we're going to still be as lean as we can and make the best use of our dollars. And I think that's another sort of testament to why I'm getting the support of people who have supported me before, because they know I'll work hard. And so they're happy to support me. And the value proposition of why this office is important is probably the more difficult thing to articulate, where in other states it may be that this is the battle for election oversight, where we haven't even started having those conversations. So like I said, nothing's going to change until you change the office holder. So let's start there.
So you consider that a first step, because like you've just alluded to, there aren't that many powers currently for the Secretary of State. Very limited staff, limited budget, and pretty much no election oversight. Mm-hmm. So are you saying that get in office and then make those changes? Are you hoping that there is a growth of influence in this office?
I think it's appropriate for the Secretary of State to be part of the conversation on what is election oversight and administration going to look like in Wisconsin, because that's what's happening in the majority of other states. Do I think that Wisconsin may have its own unique model like we've had in the past, or some sort of a hybrid? Of course. What I tell people, even when I'm out on the stump, is, if I'm elected, I don't expect anyone to hand me the keys to the kingdom. But I want the keys to that office in the basement so I can open the door and start working with people. And so modernizing the business services that are provided in the Secretary of State's office. Again, doing my best to be a quality billion-dollar board member on a small 3-person board. And then election integrity, election oversight. I think the legislature should pursue a wide range of policy options. So if you want to put me at WEC, put me on the WEC board as a 7th or tie-breaking member, or move over hybrid duties, or transfer everything to the Secretary of State. That's for the legislature to decide. And I understand. I'm in the legislature now. Maybe I should say where I'm at if I want to be part of those conversations. But I already made this decision, and I really think that the relationship that I have with the legislature right now is going to be beneficial to getting those conversations going. I've never had a meeting with Doug Follette, and I've been on finance for 4 terms. I've been in the legislature for 6. He's never come to have a meeting. I mean, nothing is going to happen with him in that office. So again, that's a starting point. Sure. And elections have certainly become a much larger topic, and bringing that office into the fold. But there have also been, it's not just idle chatter. It's polling and other things are showing that there's an appetite for putting someone that is accountable to the voters more directly involved in election oversight.
I think what you just said is why we're seeing these more hotly contested Secretary of State races across the country. 27 Secretary of State races nationally. Candidates in 18 of those states question the results of the 2020 election. One of your Republican challengers saying that Wisconsin electors should be rescinded in the 2020 election. Election denial, definitely part of this race for Secretary of State. Should Wisconsin voters trust the results of the 2020 election?
I think that election confidence is at a low point. As far as I can look back into my time in the legislature and as my time as an adult voter in Wisconsin. I mean, I was up at 1 a.m. watching the George Bush, Florida hanging chads. And I remember saying to my husband, well, I'm going to just wait until they call the race and then I'll go to sleep. But, that was months that it took to get that one buttoned up. But in my lifetime, we haven't seen anything like this. I had a recount. My very first primary, I had a recount in 2010. And so I won it was a 14 to 19 vote margin. So I learned a lot of things that I did not personally, I wasn't aware of, I didn't understand about how everything worked, about the canvass, about the reconciliation, about the audits and the pre-voting, how they run the tape through the machine and make sure everything works. So having that basic understanding, and actually sat through a few days of the Trump recount in 2016, I think that those gave me a good foundation to not wonder, well, why did all the ballots come in so late? Well, it's because they can't count them, and there were so many more ballots that came in absentee, and knowing what central count is, because I have central count where I live, where if you're watching from another state or someone that's not really actively involved or has been a poll worker, things look questionable. But I think when you methodically go through and you can answer most of those questions, but as far as some of the other policies and that the Legislative Audit Bureau, for example, came up with, I think we have some work to do.
So 2020 election results still in question?
We need to move forward. The election results were certified. I think we need to look at some of the ballots that were cast and if they would have been, if we want to tighten up our absentee voter rules or not allow ballot boxes, those are policy decisions. But we have to accept the results of the election from 2020 and move on.
So speaking of election deniers, former President Trump has been weighing in on Secretary of State races across the country, making some candidate endorsements. He hasn't done that yet in Wisconsin. Would you welcome an endorsement from former President Trump? Where are you on that?
I am so far from contemplating some of these large events kind of happening. I mean, that's like a seismic shift where I'm running for this office. I decided to run for this office when I was running for re-election the last time. So it's been almost 2 years. So I want to run on my ideas. I want to run as myself. I want to earn the votes of my Republican colleagues and friends and neighbors. I also want to earn independent votes and Democrat votes. And so I think what's going to help me the most is trying to get out there and do the work and meet those people, shake their hand, look them in the eye and ask for their vote and share my ideas with them. I don't want to be the candidate that gets launched into either great success or great failure on account of one person's endorsement that's not from our state. I mean, other groups, if the Fraternal Order of Police wants to endorse me, that's fine. But for this race, I think it's best to maintain sort of somewhat of a hands-off approach to these large, big-name endorsements.
So you have 3 Republican challengers. So before the general election in November, when you'd be against the incumbent, you have a primary. Mm-hmm. What makes you the better candidate than your other Republican challengers?
I think I'm the most qualified, credible candidate that this office has seen in a number of years, frankly. With no disrespect to anyone that has run before, but I'm a tough campaigner. So I think my ideas are better. I think they're more pragmatic. So when I ran, even in 2010, I didn't run as an activist. I ran as a pragmatist. I ran as a problem solver, and because that's who I am. And so that's what I'm going to bring forward again. And so maybe for some candidates that's not extreme enough, where they want someone that is going to, wants to decertify the elections or things like that, where that's okay, that's contrast. But at the end of the day, if we want to have someone in that office that's going to work and do the job and do it well and with integrity and work with the legislature to add duties and add value, I would be the candidate in the primary and in the general election who should win.
This is no secret, there's been a lot of disagreement within the Republican Party around the 2020 election. Former Supreme Court Justice Gableman just released his investigative report today. Your Republican Assembly colleague and candidate for governor, Representative Timothy Ramthun, is running on decertifying the election. So this is a gubernatorial candidate issue as well. So does this division in the Republican Party cause you concern for the party as a whole?
Yes.
Why is that?
Because when I'm putting on my partisan hat, when Republicans fight with Republicans, Democrats win. So we're not helping ourselves advance our own ideas and our own values and our own goals if we're infighting to the point that our message is getting lost and the Democrats are controlling, their message. And so that's more of from a partisan lens. But even in general, we can't resurrect someone from the dead. You can't unring the bell. If we want to relitigate this through November and then relitigate it again, we're going to be into another presidential cycle. This is just not a good use of our time. I get it. It's important to fix laws that need to be fixed, or promulgate administrative rules instead of issuing guidance documents. I agree with those things. And we are doing those things now, and we can do more of them with a different governor that's a Republican, because Tony Evers doesn't seem to want to sign these bills. But maybe things will change when that dynamic changes. I think it's pretty hard to veto a bill that comes from a recommendation of the Legislative Audit Bureau. But, that's not my challenge necessarily to make. I'm just going to, I voted for those guidance documents. I voted to ban outside money, all of those things. So when we reconvene again next January with the new legislature, these issues aren't going to have gone away, because they're still going to need to be resolved. But if we don't move past the results of 2020, I think that we're going to be the worse off for it in the long run, because we've let all these other things go by the wayside, and we need to focus on the future.
Watching that hearing with Supreme Court Justice Gableman today, those divisions are still alive and well. How do they close? How do they get resolved?
Well, we keep reopening the wound, and I'm not disrespecting people that are genuinely. It's kind of like grief, where you're in denial, and then you're angry, and then you're sad, and then you're kind of renegotiating whose fault it is. And but we're not getting to that closure point. And I think because sometimes we keep reopening these old wounds, and so I am not an expert in the psychology of of how you deal with something that is such a, I mean, it was a loss that people are unwilling to accept, and it is evident that there are things where if we would have seen them coming, but we also have to remember that lawsuits were filed prior to the November 2020 election, that there were all these sort of, technicalities and things like that. But at the end of the day, again, I don't think people are going to give up on their positions, but I think just like any other, whether it's a partisan disagreement or not, I mean, we need to just sort of, set it aside. It shouldn't be I can be pro-life and someone else can be pro-choice, but that doesn't mean that we can't talk about economic development or transportation or something like that, where, there can be fundamental disagreements, but we've got to set our differences aside sometimes and just focus on, again, the future.
Talk about differences, a lot of differences in opinion on what should happen with the Wisconsin Elections Commission. You see the gubernatorial candidates coming out with their proposals for WEC. What do you think should happen with the Wisconsin Elections Commission, and what would your role be ideally as Secretary of State?
Well, I've tried to be as flexible, I think, as I can with my message, because I will put myself out there to take on as much responsibility as the legislature feels is appropriate. There's going to have to be a balance. I've sort of, I can see even the differences between the gubernatorial candidates and the legislature, and that's going to be for them to work out. But look at what other states do. Start moving over some responsibilities. Talk about it during the budget process. Again, when I am out and I am talking directly to voters, and right now mostly I'm talking to Republican primary voters because that's sort of my audience right now. There is a lot of dissatisfaction with WEC. There's a lot of distrust, and so I don't know that we're going to be able to overcome that and rebuild it. And perhaps we should disband it and replace it with something else. And perhaps the Secretary of State should be part of that conversation.
So it remains to be seen, but definitely room for improvement, sounds like.
Well, I don't want to overpromise and underdeliver, and I also don't want to dictate what's going to happen with an office that is somewhat ministerial in nature, where the policymakers are the legislature, and they should need to work with the executive branch. Talk to clerks, see what other states are doing.
Your run for Secretary of State means you're leaving your role in the state assembly. We interviewed then candidate Amy Loudenbeck back in 2010, and we have a clip from that I'd like to show and then get your reaction.
It would be my priority and my privilege to make the whole district feel engaged in the legislative process and in state government, and to really, I think, solving the problems that exist in state government. It's not about common sense government, which one of my opponents may advocate. It's not about leadership and who can spend taxpayers' money the most efficiently. It's about the people. It's about taking the message from the district to Madison and making people engaged in state government and believe our district and our future is connected to representation and not at the whim of lawmakers in Madison.
What do you remember about that time?
I remember being overwhelmed. It was before my primary. I remember coming in, it was right around when we had to hand in nomination papers. So, your candidates, you're kind of a one-woman show. And so it's like, I'm going to go run over here and make photocopies and then go have this interview and then probably go to a town hall meeting or something like that. So it's kind of a hectic time. But even listening about the local issues and versus the policy issues, and that has been something that has been really important. And when I look back and I think about that interview, and transportation was, and what that wasn't in the clip, but transportation was such a huge issue at that point, and how we're going to pay for roads and the interstate from the state line to Madison, which is from the state line to Janesville is my assembly district, and it kind of feels good that it got done.
And workforce issues in your district are a lot improved since then.
Yes,
too.
I think Rock and Walworth County have had a really good run the last 12 years. But that interstate, when it came down to, let's take the example of, whether it's the gas tax or tolling or, how we're going to pay for the roads. At home, it was like just we need that interstate needs to get done. And so again, not picking the perfect answer, but solving the problem. And
you've been true to
thank
that.
goodness it's gotten done, and that project was prioritized, and it's so nice to be finished. It really is a great accomplishment. But yes, that candidate. And I knew those things because I worked at the chamber, and that had always been a priority. I think that I brought so many different things because I come from a rural area, but I had worked in an urban area and with economic development, and I think I brought a lot of people with me that I could go back and talk to, and so it really gave me a good sounding board, kitchen cabinet to kind of keep my moral compass and keep my eye on the prize, which was kind of just getting things done and not putting certain interests before another, I guess.
Since that election, you've really become a significant leader in your party and in the legislature. You are the current vice chair of the Joint Finance Committee. You have a lot of important roles. A lot of people would see this step to the Secretary of State as a step down. There's not as much responsibility. So why would you want to leave this job that you currently have?
Because it's different. I have enjoyed every session I have served in the legislature. I love being on the Finance Committee. It's my 4th budget. It's my 6th term. But 12 years is a pretty long time, I think, to serve in one position in state government. And so when I think about, well, what would I want to do? If I don't win, I'll go and get a job in my area, and I'm sure I'll be perfectly happy. But I think to step outside of your comfort zone and do something, take on a new challenge, and I think this office can be what I am willing to put into it, which is a lot. And so I think it sounds exciting.
Remains to be seen, sure.
Right. And so, so it's different. Maybe it's not as much power, but if that's what you're seeking. But for me, I kind of just want to try my hand at something new.
Since you've been in the legislature, I know you've championed a variety of issues. You are known for advocating for children on human trafficking issues, homeless youth. You recently led a charge for a pay increase for public defenders, expanding student loans for minority students. Those don't sound like traditional Republican issues, but you've gotten a lot of bipartisan support, and these things have become law. What's the secret to your success?
I think explaining the overall benefit, I guess. I would call myself a compassionate conservative. And so these issues are, they're not Democrat issues or Republican issues, but but when you say traditional, it's not just cutting spending and balancing budgets, which obviously I like all those things too. And so maybe it's just that I'm so intense on the budget stuff that then I try to do a few bills before we start the budget and do a few more after. And there are always things that come up that when you're out in the district or trying to do things. So we've had the good opportunity, I think, to really noodle through some of these issues. So the cycle, which I enjoy, the legislative process in the cycle, where we're at 1,100 bills now, and the next session they get to start all over with a clean piece of paper. But if you're smart, you work your bills in the summer so that they're ready, and you learn from your times out in the community, and you kind of just have this running list of things. And so I happen to have a really active unaccompanied and homeless youth coalition in my district. So they came to me with this list of challenges they were facing, and we were willing to put in the work to tease out things that were maybe they were just a banking policy issue versus a statutory issue, but methodically going through there and then finding where the problem is and then really honing in on it. So some of the bills I've done have been, like the minority scholarship. It was basically saying, okay, if we're going to have this program and it's only available to students in Milwaukee and we don't spend the money every year, why don't we open it up to other areas? This is not very different. But then you learn that in finance, and then you go back and you build a coalition and do the bill. But knowing that already that you're not going to run up hopefully against a whole bunch of resistance, and so but it's a lot of explaining. And so the human trafficking, a lot of the work that I did was with the help of former Attorney General J.B. Van Hollen, because I really wanted to champion this, and I reached out. And so I think, again, reaching out to people that can help you, whether they're in state government or at home. But my office is excellent, and we have really mastered, I think, the art of getting good bills put together, building these coalitions, and working through the process, getting the hearings, all of those things, just making sure that they all go really smoothly. And and if they're not conservative ideas, they're just they're practical.
Another practical issue that you've worked on is emergency services.
Mm-hmm.
I know in your background you're a former volunteer firefighter, your husband a professional firefighter and emergency services professional. That's an issue you're passionate about. You spoke about it recently on the Assembly floor. We're going to hear about next generation 911 advocacy.
So I called my husband back, and he answered the phone. And he was super out of it by this time. But we stayed on the phone. I told him they were coming. He kept repeating himself. I made him count to 10. I made him say his ABCs. Just kept him talking so he didn't go into shock until the police officer came. And he was literally stumbling around the yard. Super scary situation that there's so many things that I'm thankful for that day. But one thing in particular is for me to be able to make a call from Dane County to Rock County and then be able to put a pin in my red roof and find my husband and save his life. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Evident how passionate you are about all of these issues. You just talked about that. What will you miss most about being a state legislator?
Oh my goodness. I think just all of the resources in a weird way, because and now I'm probably a lot better at gathering information than I ever have been, so it's not like I'm going to be lost without the Fiscal Bureau. I mean, I'm pretty good at digging down and getting the information, but so often, even the constituent work, we're a resource. We're not just there to pass bills. We're there to do the constituent services and the constituent work. And so the part where it's a different day every day. And people ask questions that I haven't never even contemplated before. And we get the opportunity to answer them because that's our job, and you just never know what you'll learn along the way. So I think that sort of unexpected opportunity it's like being in the classroom of life every day, and with policy all mixed in, and that part, it really is something that I enjoy, truly enjoy.
As we round out our time together, I want to ask you about being a woman in the legislature. I know that Republican women in the legislature and in Congress have made some strides, but we're going to look at some data that shows in the Wisconsin legislature there really has been an increase in Democratic women to a greater degree than Republican women. And there's some data that says that it's more difficult for Republican women maybe to get through primaries, or that polarization impacts them differently in their communities, making them not want to run. What do you think is the state of Republican women running for office?
Well, I know where I am, so many people on my team that are in in GOP politics or in local politics are women. So it's interesting, and maybe that's just my kind of my peers. But when I look at the makeup of the legislature and the women that are in the legislature, I think that my colleagues I love the legislature because everyone kind of brings something different to the table. But as for a woman being on finance, and we have 2 women on our Republican Assembly team, I think it's super important, because when you're dealing with that whole, and I mean, it's different if you're on different committees. If you're on the health committee and there are a bunch of nurses or education, but the budget is every single basically spending category in the state. And so to make sure that we have women on there to sort of just buffer how much does it cost, and then maybe look a little bit closer at some of the policies, or if people think that this is a priority. Again, kind of that compassionate conservative, without being necessarily an activist for something. And so, I mean, I hope more women run, but I also feel like maybe they feel like they have a better opportunity women are in so many other different professions now too. Like you could look at teachers where they say, well, there are fewer women are getting into teaching. Well, because they're becoming, doctors or IT people or whatever. There's all these career opportunities open to women. So I guess if they choose not to want to run for the legislature, maybe that's okay, because maybe they just think it's not for them. They wouldn't enjoy it, and they feel like that they're happy where they are. But no one asked me to run. I was self-selected. And so I would say that maybe there is a little bit of that, where not enough women are being asked.
So as we close out our time, I know you've said this, you think this is going to be maybe hard to beat this 4-decade incumbent who has a lot of name recognition. What can we expect from you in the next few months? And are you expecting that you will win?
I know I can. I can't. There are a lot of things that I can't control, but if I am able to execute my plan, I will. So that being said, what to expect to see from me? Hopefully a lot statewide. I'm going to try to be really creative with getting out my name ID and my message, but also some really traditional grassroots things. And so kind of looking for, I've probably been to half the counties already in the state for their caucus or Lincoln Day dinners or things like that. But as time goes by, rodeos, state fair, county fairs, car shows, all of them.
We haven't heard the last from you.
Yes, I'll be around. That is for sure, and out and about, and hopefully introducing myself to new people all the time.
And teaching more people about what it is the Secretary of State is.
Right.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you to the viewers of Newsmakers. Be sure to tune in again as we highlight the issues and sit down with the decision makers who make a difference for all of us.
This program is a production of Wisconsin Eye, an independent, nonpartisan, nonprofit media network with a mission to inform, educate, and engage the citizens of Wisconsin. Wisconsin Eye is the nation's first and only independently funded state civics broadcast network, providing gavel-to-gavel access to government proceedings and events at the state capitol.